Welcome to video 9 of the genetics video series. The lesson today is on pedigrees. Now, before you start the pedigree video, you want to make sure that you've done pretty much every other genetics activity that we've had in here, really culminating with the incomplete and codominant video and quizzes. The reason that these are going to be so important is because at some point you're actually going to be tracking blood types through pedigrees, and so you want to make sure that you feel really comfortable knowing what the different blood types are and how you can track them through families. As you watch today's video, you want to be following along with a pedigree problem worksheet. That's part of our genetics unit. There's going to be some times when you're going to pause the video and you're going to work on some problems on your own. Having the sheet with you would be really helpful. This is a quick review. We know that genetics all starts with DNA, and that DNA leads to RNA, which is translated into an amino acid sequence, which eventually becomes protein. Those proteins end up giving us all the traits that we see inside of our bodies, like eye color and hair color. We are also able to then track multiple of those traits at the same time to try to really determine probabilities based on, again, more than one trait. And then in the last lesson, we even looked at traits that were a little bit different, so they didn't follow the basic rules. And so as opposed to just being completely dominant, we had things like incomplete dominance and codominance. So after all that, we can move into one of our final lessons, which is on taking a look at how those traits pass through the entire thing. So it's something we typically look at so far, really just examining, you have two parents, what happens to those parents' kids. But when we look at just those parents' kids, we're sort of missing a big piece of the pie when it comes to genetics. Because genetics is something that's been passed down through that entire family's history. So as opposed to just looking at two parents and their kids, we can actually expand our view into something that's more commonly referred to as a family tree, but what we're going to eventually call pedigree. So where we can track grandparents giving passing traits to one person who mates with another person and has kids, and we can track those kids further into the future, and actually watch how specific traits move through an entire family, really an entire extended family by the time that we're done drawing pedigrees. So now you can take a look at a pedigree that looks like this. So we see that we have one grandparent and another grandparent mating with one another on this line. We see that they have one offspring, in this case Homer. Homer then mates with Marge following this line. We see that Homer and Marge end up having some kids. Lisa, Bart, and Meg. Now you can continue drawing this even further. So someday Lisa gets married and ends up having a kid, and so then Lisa's kids would be down here. You can continue to trace this back and back and back. And you can even go into Abe Simpson or Grandpa Simpson. You can look at Abe Simpson's parents and see what Abe Simpson's parents were like and where they came from. So this is the real interesting thing about pedigrees, is you're able to track traits for a huge period of time in really simple diagrams. And I'll say in science, the diagrams are even much simpler than what we're looking at here. We don't look at specific pictures or even names. All right. So like here, you can actually track names with family members from different sides of the family. So you can see Marge's family in there too, and you can even see to some extent what happens with adopted kids in terms of Link, Selma. From a science perspective, though, we can even be a little more clear about what these organisms look like. And instead of drawing with people's pictures or people's names, we sort of distill it down into a diagram. It's like this. This is what's known as a pedigree. So to familiarize yourself a little bit with what pedigrees mean in terms of the symbols that are used, this is found in the handout, so you can follow along and take any notes that you need. Some basics that you need. The first thing we need to compare are these two pieces of information right here. Those pieces of information at the top tell us the difference between the symbols. So on the symbols, you see a square, so you see a square here, a square here. That always indicates a male member of that family. Where the opposite is true. Whenever you see a circle, circles are what are going to indicate female members of that same family. So now we know the difference between males and females, and let's take a look at some of the lines that are connected. Any line that is connecting a female to a male, such as this one right here, what that's going to indicate is a mating. So in this case, the mating, if you trace it down, ends up producing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids. All Right? So that mating between these two parents ended up producing 5 kids. And if we look at those kids a little bit more closely, what we'll determine is that 4 of those kids are girls. So they ended up having, sorry, 4 of those kids are girls. Right? They had 4 daughters, and they ended up, after they had 4 daughters, they ended up with 1 son. And the order usually works from left to right in terms of chronological order, so that this child would have been the first child, this child would have been the second child, the third child, the fourth child, this would have been their last child, the youngest daughter. So now as you look at this, there's some interesting framing in that regard, but what's nice about keeping the diagram so simple is that you can track them for huge distances without really taking up a ton of space in it. So we actually have 3 different generations of organisms represented here, moving down the line. All right. Sometimes you'll also get a situation like you see this person over here. This guy over here, we actually don't know what his family history was. He sort of married into this family and had a kid with their daughter here, and the kid is F, the one down here. All right. So we don't necessarily know anything about his history, but a lot of what we can see about him comes from how his shape is shaded. So if you notice, there's some shapes on here that are empty, such as one of the original grandmothers, whereas the grandfather is a shaded shape. And if we take a look back at our top, what we can see is that if we look at this key up here, we see that all these shaded shapes mean that this person has heart disease, so some genetic form of heart disease that we're tracking in their family. Whereas if you are blank, you are normal. Now, one of the things you need to know when you're going into a pedigree that helps to know is whether the trait is dominant or recessive. So it seems like in this case, we're just going to use H's for simplicity's sake, is that we know that there's 3 different genotypes that you can have. Genes in red instead. All right, so if we use H's, H is going to be the dominant, and in this case, the dominant trait is actually the normal, whereas little h is going to be the recessive trait, and that means that you're going to have heart disease. All right, now how do you figure out which one's dominant, which one's recessive? Well, the easiest shortcut method is just to sort of look at the overall pedigree and count the number of organisms who have each trait. You'll notice that there's way more empty shapes on this chart than there are full shapes. Right? In fact, you count them up, there ends up being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 empty shapes, as compared to only 6 shaded shapes. So what that would tell you is that you would expect that a rare disease, something that is more rare in a population, is also recessive because there's less likely to see it. So that's why in this case we can sort of assume that. Now there's more complex ways you can figure that out as well. And sometimes you'll be tricked. It'll turn out that, it just so happens in a family there's more of a recessive trait than the dominant one. But you could also just sort of try it out in pedigree and see if your answers make sense or not to figure out which one is which. You'll actually have to do that in one of the questions on the sheet. When you look at a disease on the back of the paper, you'll have to figure out if it's dominant or recessive. So in this case, I'm just going to let you know, for just simplicity, if we go through it, that to be normal is the dominant trait. That's why we made a big H. And have heart disease is no H. Now, when you're looking at a pedigree, it's really just a big logic puzzle, trying to figure out what pieces go where. And if you remember from just basic genotypes, you essentially can always have 3 different genotypes for a trait like this. You can be big H, little h, or little h, little h. And as you look through these, what you would know, since being normal is dominant, if you are big H, meaning you have 1 normal gene from one parent and 1 normal gene from the other parent, you would expect to be normal. All right, if we look at little h and little h, that means you got 1 heart disease gene from one parent and 1 heart disease gene from another parent. You would expect that this person would have heart disease. All right, now we got to remember that this heterozygote can be different, and it's going to be different, especially based we learned about is it complete dominance, incomplete dominance, or codominance. In this case, most of them that we're going to be working with are complete dominance. So if it's big H, little h, we know that big H is dominant to little h, and normal is dominant to having heart disease. So that this person here should be normal. Okay, now how does this knowledge help us? Well, what this tells us right off the bat is we know 6 genotypes in this chart. And we're going to be able to start to label them in here. We know that anybody who is shaded has heart disease. And we also know that the only way to get heart disease is to be little h, little h. So that means that every single person in the entire pedigree that is shaded must be little h, little h. And what you'll see as you start to fill all these little h's in is that every time you can figure out one person, it's another piece to the whole puzzle that you're trying to fill out. So whenever you get something as easy as knowing what 6 people are right away, the first thing you should do is write in what those are. All right, now the empty shapes are not quite as easy. Right? The empty shapes are not quite as easy because we have 2 different options that something can be in order to be normal. All right? They can either be big H, or they can be big H, little h. Now, as we start to compare these, if we take a look at one of the parents, we can't tell just by the fact that the shape is empty whether they are big, or whether they are big, little. We have to use a little bit more investigation. But one of the interesting things that we do know, what do they both have in common? Both of them have at least one big H. All right, now, from this, what I like to do is actually go in and add one big H to each one of these individuals. Because we know that has to be true. We don't necessarily know what the other letter is yet, but the way I like to think about pedigrees is that any time that you can find some clue that you know is true, you should add it. Because, again, like I said, it'll make all of the other problems that you solve that much easier. So now we know all of those individuals have at least one big H. All right, now this is where the fun of pedigrees really starts to come in. Let's start with this organism. I'll switch colors one more time. Let's switch to purple. You good? All right, as we switch to purple, what we'll find is that, let's start with this individual right here. All right, we know this individual has to either be big H, or big H, little h. But we don't know which one just by looking at just that lady. All right. However, what we do know is that she has a son and a daughter who both have heart disease, meaning that both of those kids have 2 little h's, little h and little h. And what we know from that then is each parent can only give one letter, which means that if this girl right here ended up with 2 little h's, she had to get a little h from each parent. That information allows us to figure out then that one of these little h's had to come from here, and the other little h had to come from here. So now, using that logic, we were able to figure out that this parent right here should be big H, little h, and this father here should be big H, little h as well. That's the only way you can get a daughter who has little h, little h. All right, now the same is true for this son right here. All right, we can go back. All right, those are some that we know right off the bat. However, we got to be careful because what happens over with these 2 individuals on this side is that we wind up in a situation where we still don't know what they are. All right, it is possible in those scenarios that, we get our magic pen out for a second, it is possible that this parent gave a big H and this parent gave a little h, which would make that person big H, little h. It's also possible that this parent gave a big H and this parent also gave a big H, and that would make this organism big H, big H. Without knowing that lady's kids, we actually can't say for sure one way or the other whether this person is big H, or big H, little h. So the way that we fill that in is we end up putting a little slash. So the way we would write it would look, this person could be big H, slash big H, little h. Because we really don't know. And the same is true for her brother. This person would be big H, or big H, little h, because we just don't know. All right, let's flip over to the other side for a second. We'll switch back to our purple color. All right, again, we can use that same logic here where this lady right here, we don't know what she is, all right, just straight off the bat, but we do know that she has a kid, a daughter, who has the disease. So that means one of her daughter's little h's had to come from the dad, and the other little h had to come from the mom, meaning that this has to be big H, little h. It's the only way to get that daughter that has the disease. All right, now if we keep this going, we can see, let's look at this person right here. We know they have to have at least one big H because they are normal. However, one of their parents, in fact their dad, this one right here, only has little h's to give, which means that one of these little h's has to be right here. And this person has to be, that guy has to be big H, little h. And that's also true for her sister, his sister right there, and his sister right there. Because the dad, this one right here, can only give a little h. So that means that everybody, all of these kids in this whole generation right here have to have at least one little h. Right now, that same logic can help us with this place down here. We see that this guy only has two little h's, which means that every one of these kids down here has to be big H, little h. Because that this guy right here only had a little h to give. All right. So then an overall question would be taking a look at F. All right, you could start to figure out what F's probabilities are. All right, you have this parent here with big H, little h. You have this parent here with little h, little h. And if you do that math out, there would be a 50% chance that that kid would have heart disease. Now that you've been able to try this one, what I'd like you to do is on your own, press pause now and go through the question that you see up on the board, the one that you have on the paper. All right, so practice this on your own. When you feel like you've answered A and B, you want to go through and you want to press play and we'll go through the answers together. All right, now that you've had a chance to pause the video, let's check our answers and see how well we did. All right, now the first thing that we'll notice is that this is a common trait we've dealt before, which is brown eyes and blue eyes. All right, we know that brown eyes are dominant to blue eyes. So the first thing that we can do is find, let's see, blue eyes are the shaded ones in this case. And since blue eyes are recessive, the first thing that we should do is fill in every shaded one with little b little. We know that right off the bat. The only way to get blue eyes is to be little b little. All right, now how does this help us? Well, if we take a look at number 3 is still a mystery for us. So number 3 is right here. All right, we know that everybody else on here has to have at least one big B. And so you can go through and fill all these in. They have brown eyes, so they have at least one big B. We don't know what the other one is yet. We'll know in a second. Okay, let's take a look back at number 3. We see that number 3 has a kid with 2 little b's. So they had to get one little b from one parent and one little b from the other parent, which means that that comes from there, and that must come from there, so 3 must be big B little b. All right, let's take a look at the next generation, all right, which is, if we take a look at 9, 11, and 12, we know they each have one big B, but their mom can only donate a little b, which means that all of these, 9 must be big B little b, 11 must be big B little b, and 12 must be little b, because their mom could only give them a little b. Let's move over to the other side to 5, 6, 7, and 8. All right, now this one, if we take a look through, the same thing. Their dad is big B little b, blue eyes, which means every one of them must be big B little b, because dad could only have given them a little b, but they all have brown eyes. And I think that, oh, it's almost everybody. The only one that leaves us with are 14 and 15. All right, so this guy and this girl right here, we have to figure out, are they big B or big B little b? All right, now this is one of those where we actually don't know, because it's possible that both parents gave them a big B, or one parent gave them a big B and the other one gave them a little b. So this is a situation where we do our slash that we actually don't know. All right, how could we figure it out? Well, we need to see what their kids look like. All right, we would need to see if they have any kids who have blue eyes, because that would let us know that they're big B, little b. All right, or if they mate with somebody with blue eyes and none of their kids have blue eyes, we would know that they would be big B, big. We wouldn't know that without some more data. All right, question B asks, what is the probability that individual 5 and individual 10 will have a blue-eyed child? So let's find individual 5 is right here, and individual 10 is right here. All right, now if we ignore the fact that they're sort of related, they're actually in-laws, and we just go with it, we see that that would be 5 would be big B, little b, 10 would be little b, little b. If we do the Punnett square out, we find that they have a 50% chance of having a kid with blue eyes. Okay, at this point, if you feel comfortable with Punnett squares, you should move on to do the rest of the questions. All right, questions 2 through 4, and then take the pedigree quiz. If you're not comfortable yet, you should go back and watch the video or ask Mr. Caputi if you have any questions. Good luck.